and welcome back to the Financially Simple Experience. So today I want to talk specifically to dentists. That's right. We have a ton of dentists that listen to the podcast. Now, because I'm specifically addressing dentists, doesn't mean that if you're an attorney, a farmer, manufacturer owner, somebody who owns a retail shop, whatever other type of business that you own, doesn't mean it's not applicable to you. However, I want to center today's podcast and perhaps the next 2 or 3 podcasts around dentists. You see, a dental practice is not dissimilar from any other service industry. Most of the time, the dentist is the primary breadwinner. They're at the epicenter of the business. And so when we talk about removing the owner from the epicenter, there is no one more in the epicenter of the business than a dentist. So over the next few weeks, I challenge you to apply the concepts to your specific business. But because of the sheer number of questions that we had coming from dentists over the last little bit, we wanted to address these next 4 episodes, 3 to 4 episodes to dentists. Today, I want to talk about growing your dental practice, or if you're not a dentist, growing your business. And reinvestment could be the key. Reinvestment could be the key. Now, in the early days of business, what do? Well, if you start a business from scratch, you are working with anybody who can fog a mirror. You're barely paying yourself. You're putting money back into the business, buying equipment, buying inventory, marketing, whatever it may be, to get the business to a point where you feel fairly confident that the business is sustainable. Then at some point in the life cycle of the business, you begin taking resources. You begin paying yourself more and more. You begin adding some benefits for you within the company, whether that is a company car, or perhaps you have your cell phone paid for by the business, or your health insurance, or a company trip around some sort of a continuing education or survey or something of that nature. But before you know it, we reach a point in our business where we have to consider, should we reinvest or not? So before I get too deep in the weeds, I want to talk about a few basic assumptions for today's conversation. A few basic assumptions. First, I'm assuming that you own a healthy dental practice. I'm assuming you own a healthy dental practice, not one that is just barely getting by, not one that is significantly below industry average in terms of margins. Another assumption that I have for today's episode is that you are completely out of debt. Perhaps you bought your practice, you paid the exiting doc, you secured a 7-figure, 8-figure note, 6-figure note, and now you've been paying it off for some period of time. You've already made the mistakes of business ownership in your first decade or so. So you're out of debt. I'm making that assumption today. I'm making the assumption that the business is paying you enough income that you're no longer living paycheck to paycheck, as we do when we first start a business or when we first acquire a business. I'm making the assumption that you're doing the basics. You are maxing out your retirement plans. Maybe it's your Roth IRA, your 401k. You're paying down your personal debts with your cash flow. Maybe it's now you've upsized your vehicle. Maybe you've upsized your real estate. You've got the spending items that we see so many dentists do in the first 10 years. You've already begun moving in that direction. And further, I'm making the assumption that now you realize you have an asset, this dental practice, which is a significant portion of your net worth. More than likely, it is valued at 60, 70, 80% of your net worth. And you want to grow that asset. So that's the backdrop that I want to talk to you about today. So now that we have the assumptions out of the way, let's talk about this idea of reinvesting. Taking money that perhaps we were paying ourselves, and instead of giving it to Wall Street, instead of throwing it into a real estate somewhere, a piece of real estate property, instead of buying Legos, or my wife would buy purses, I would buy guns. Instead of doing that type of thing, or fishing poles for me, it just doesn't matter for me, anything outdoors, you're now thinking, holy cow, I have this asset that if I could just reinvest more, then I could see my net worth considerably increase. So let's talk about it. You spent years becoming a dentist. You went to school for 8, 9, 10 years, depending on your specialty. And you've gone through the first decade probably of your career where you've made the mistakes, and now you feel like you're in a position to determine what does the next 10 years for me look like. You're living the lifestyle that you desire. However, it's now time to consider, how do I grow my net worth? In order to understand reinvestment into your business, in other words, you're making some delta, instead of taking it home, you're going to deploy the cash back into the business. In order to understand the impact of that, we have to consider opportunity cost. The definition of opportunity cost is the loss of potential gain from an alternatives when one alternative is chosen. That's the technical definition. Let me give you the practical definition. Let's say that you could pay yourself $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 in income. But instead of that, you have the opportunity to put $100,000 back in the business. Maybe you're going to hire somebody to help you with processes. Maybe you're going to deploy that money for marketing. Maybe you're going to deploy that money for equipment, a more technology in your practice, whatever it may be. You have the opportunity to either spend that money on lifestyle, go on a fancy trip somewhere, buy a Porsche, do whatever it is that you're going to do, or you can redeploy that money into the practice. Now, in order to understand what a true ROI, return on our investment, is going to be, we have to bench that $100,000 going into the practice to get something out there. So we know that we could go put that $100,000 theoretically in a CD making just a hypothetical 5%, just for illustration purposes. So we put $100,000 in a CD, we can make 5% in my example, which means that we would earn $5,000 on our $100,000. Opportunity cost says that if I pour $100,000 into my business, that, hey, it needs to do better than that 5% in the CD. We need to get a return of greater than $5,000. If we didn't, then we lost some opportunity. We could have deployed it into a CD and it made a better return. Now that's a very simple example. The reality is that we could calculate opportunity costs against buying real estate property, buying currency, buying securities like stocks, bonds. We could deploy that $100,000 into a number of things that should yield us a return. So in order to calculate opportunity cost, we have to subtract your rate of return from the higher yielding investment, the one that you would probably choose, from the rate of return of the lower yielding investment. So hypothetically, if we were to put our $100,000 in our 5% CD and our business only yielded 2% return, then that opportunity cost was $3,000, right? So we put $100,000 in our business and only gave us 2% return. We made $2,000. Put $100,000 in a CD. The opportunity cost was the delta between the two of those, so $3,000. In order to understand the reinvestment of our business, we have to look at our dollars as soldiers, so to speak, on a battlefield. Where can we get the greatest return that's going to impact our net worth the most? And then measure it. So the first thing we have to understand is opportunity cost. Now we're going to tie this point that we're talking about now through the rest of the podcast. If you need more information on opportunity costs, I've done many podcasts on this. But I challenge you to go take a look at the Financially Simple blog. Now, the next step is to determine where your highest and best use of your reinvestment lies within the business. So you say, Justin, I'm going to deploy $100,000 into the business. Great. Where can we put the $100,000 in the business to give us the greatest return on our investment? Now, many times when we ask this question, naturally, as dentists, we're kind of geeky, techie type people. If you're a dentist, then you may be thinking, well, I'm going to go out and buy this digital so-and-so or this new piece of technology. That's typically the knee-jerk reaction that happens. I want to dive into that a little bit more. Nexus Health in 2023 State of the Dental report stated that 6.2% of dentist practices saw revenue growth of more than 20% in 2022. Let me say that again. The report from the Nexus Health said in 2022, average dentists had about a 20% growth in their business. How did yours do? Did yours have a 20% growth? Why not? Now, as I ask that question, your mind's going to, well, man, it's hard right now with a team. Friends, I got to tell you, I sit in on a dozen or so current clients dealing with their business side of things, and the team is the number one complaint. Number one. And the team has been highly disruptive depending on where you're at in the microeconomics of your location across our country. Maybe you're saying, Justin, I didn't hit my 20% because my technology is antiquated. Maybe I didn't hit my 20% because we have more patients going out the back door than we do the front door. And there could be a many things which could cause your practice not to hit 20%. So the first thing is we have to look at, is our practice meeting the standard? In 2022, did we hit 20%? No. Then whenever we're thinking about deploying assets, deploying money into our practice, we need to take a step back and not make the knee-jerk reaction that technology is going to solve our problems, which typically is the first step that many dentists make. So let's consider some areas that you might want to invest in. Have you ever considered investing in automation? High revenue growth practices, and we've got a citation for this, a particular study that quantifies this, were 3 times as likely to invest in automation. See, whenever you automate things, it drives hyper efficiency. You could theoretically streamline your patient intake process through automation, thus reducing the human element and not having to hire as many people. You could automate the appointment and follow-up of treatment scheduling. You could expedite billing through automation. You can ensure patient privacy and adherence to regulation through automation. There's so many other things you can do through automation. So as you're saying, Justin, I'm thinking about investing in my business. Well, one of the areas you might consider is automation. Think about it from the patient experience. I'm sure you've gone to businesses somewhere where you purchase something and the follow-up pre, post, during is just sweet. They're texting you automatically. They're asking you how it was. You get a call from the salesperson, the proprietor thereafter. Through automation is what creates all that movement. My wife recently had some surgery, and I was impressed with the doc and the practice that we utilize for this particular procedure. Going into the event, first of all, we had to go online and fill a form out, which was very simple. We showed up. They were waiting on us. They knew my name and her name. They had already asked us for our favorite drinks. They had them there for us when we walked into the practice. We were met by people standing up and greeting us, which I've never had that happen at a doctor's practice before. We did not sit in the waiting room very long. We were there less than 2 minutes. When we were shown to the exam room, the young lady, the nurse in this case, did her job very diligently, used technology to move things forward. The doctor came in, was right on point, knew exactly what needed to happen, had the appointment time down to where it was perfect. It wasn't too long. She addressed all the questions that we had, and then even addressed questions that we didn't know to ask. The procedure was done, and during the procedure, it was very well informed throughout the entire process. All that is probably apropos for the medical community. What was different was over the following month and a half, the doctor physically called at a set time every day. At a set time. She physically called us 4 times throughout the next month. Whenever we did the follow-up post-op procedure meeting, I asked the doc, I said, hey, what technology are you using to hold you accountable to make those calls? And she smiled and she said, we just automated it. Think about how automation can impact your particular patient experience. So you may consider investing in automation. Another thing you may consider investing in is systems which drive the number of patients you can see each day. Systems which drive patients. See, if you don't have patients in your seat, you well know that you're not making money. If you have cancellation issues, you're not making money. 55% of high revenue growth practices report seeing 11 or more patients per day. 11 or more patients per day. That's in the doctor's chair. Now, I get it. The doctor's not doing 11 different major procedures. As we all know, in a dental practice, you would have 3 or 4 perhaps procedures in a day, but the doc is seeing the recare patients that are coming in. Now, if you compare that to just 32% of practices reported negative growth, 32% of practices reported negative growth in 2022. If you read the study, you'll see that these practices did not have the right processes and procedures to drive the patient to the chairs thus the doc was losing revenue. So now if you're saying, hey, I'm thinking about reinvesting in my practice in 2023, then now may be the time to consider automation. Number one, perhaps it's now time to consider, do I invest in processes and procedures to make sure that I have people's butts in my chairs? There's another area, though, that you can invest in. And you can invest in this manner. You can build your practice for the ultimate buyer. For the ultimate buyer. This is something that I did myself in my own business before exiting my business. I realized by looking at the marketplace that there is a certain buyer group which was willing to pay me a premium for my practice, for my business. You can do the same thing. Just yesterday, I was talking to a doc, one of my consulting clients that I personally work with, and we were outlining where their practice was and where the EBITDA was, normalized EBITDA was, and what the market was paying for that particular number. And we were strategizing on how they're going to reinvest in the practice this year to move that number just about 20% over the next year and a half, 2 years. And in doing so, it actually caused the sell value of the practice to increase at about a 40% rate, all because of understanding the ultimate buyer. So let me ask you this question. If you were going to buy your business, what areas would you immediately improve in your practice? Would you update your technology? Maybe your equipment is just antiquated. Would you invest in a best-in-class marketing department, build you a marketing team that comes alongside you through maybe a third-party vendor and become an industry leader? That's what I did. I became a thought leader in the exit and financial consulting for business owner space. Maybe you can add specialists to the team. Maybe you could add a secondary service. Maybe you're just general dentist and now you want to add endo or ortho or some other discipline, pedio. The point is that you can invest in your business and drive value. That's where opportunity cost comes into play. Before we pour our dollars into marketing or into teams or into other specialties, we want to calculate the hurdle rate. That's a whole other different calculation you can read on my blog. I've done episodes on a hurdle rate, but you want to be able to identify your opportunity cost and your hurdle rate to know that if you're going to deploy $100,000, what could your assumed return be? You see, as a dental entrepreneur, there are endless ways that you can invest in your practice to take advantage of multiplicative growth. I'm giving you a few that you might consider. But now let's assume for the podcast today that you have made a decision that you're going to invest in something. Maybe it's marketing, maybe it's automation, maybe it's technology, maybe it's team, maybe it's the culture of the company, maybe it's patient retention, whatever it is that you're going to deploy your hard-earned dollars back into the company. Now we have to measure it. Now we need to measure the reinvestment success of our dollars. Between 2018 and 2023, the dental industry experienced a compounded annual growth rate. Let me say it again, a compounded annual growth rate of 1%. Think about that. Between 2018 and 2023, the dental industry experienced a CAGR, as much as you may often see it in financial reports, a compounded annual growth rate of 1%. How did you do? What was your compounded annual growth rate from 2018 to the early 2023? So Justin, I have no idea how to calculate that. All right, here we go. I'm going to give you the formula, and then I'm going to direct you to the website, okay? Because trying to hear this formula and look at it and understand it and do your own calculations is very tough. But nonetheless, just so you have a baseline for it, the annual growth rate is calculated in this fashion. The formula for calculating the average annual growth rate is complex, but I'm going to give it to you here. And I'm going to challenge you to go back and look at our blog so that you can see and calculate this for yourself. And there are calculators that are available as well. But here is the formula. The ending value divided by the beginning value over 1 divided by n minus 1 times 100. Okay, that's the calculation. The ending value. Let's talk about the ending value. What happens if you looked at your February 2023 numbers and you said, okay, in February 2023, I collected X, whatever that number is. And then you went way back to February 2018, and you said in February 2018, I collected Y. So the February 2023 number would be your ending value. February 2018 would be your beginning value. Then you're going to place that into a calculation. So here's an example. Let's say Let's say the practice revenue at the beginning of the year was $800,000 and at the end of the year was $950,000. That would give us an average growth rate of 1.18. So we're going to divide 950 divided by 800,000. That would give us an average growth rate of 1.18. And then we're going to multiply that by 100, which gives us an average growth rate of 18.75%. So if we started with $800,000 in revenue, we finished the year out with $950 in revenue, that gives us an 8.75% return on investment, or average growth rate. It's a simple calculation to look at. It's a hard calculation for me to break it down through the microphone. Nonetheless, here's my challenge to you. You have to know your average revenue growth. You have to know your compounded annual growth rate. Again, from 2018 to 2023, the average dental industry experienced a 1% growth rate, which is dismal. So if we're now going to deploy hundreds of thousands of dollars back into our practice, I would hope that we would receive greater than a 1% growth rate, wouldn't you? If not, why wouldn't we go put it in that hypothetical CD that I mentioned that could potentially give us 5%? We would. We'd be better for us to put our $100,000 making 5% than making 1%. You're like, Justin, this is so foreign to me. Friends, it is so foreign to every dentist that I ever sit down with. Because what we look at as dentists, what you look at as when I sit down with dentists is, how many new patients did I get? What was my total production? Did my production move up or down? Very seldom do I hear somebody who's able to explain what was their margin, or what was their compounded annual growth rate, or what was their return on equity. And so as we pour these dollars back into our practices, we have butterflies. Like, am I making the right decision? I mean, I could go buy a piece of real estate, right? I could go take my money. I'm going to sell my practice and go buy a bunch of real estate because I can calculate the return on my investment there. Let me wrap this up, friends. If you're a dentist, now may be a time when you consider reinvesting in your practice. There's a number of places you can put your dollars. But unless you understand opportunity cost, and unless you can calculate your rate of return, your annual growth rate on your business to see how your dollars are deployed and giving you the delta or the return you need, you're not going to be comfortable with that decision. You're going to start into a venture, find yourself when it gets tough and pull aside and end up wasting tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. Don't let this happen to you. Don't let this happen to you. You have an asset that only you can own as a dentist, just like I have an asset that only I can own as a registered individual with the Securities and Exchange Commission. You can't own a financial planning firm. I can't own a dental practice. And our businesses make up a significant portion of our wealth. Let's drive our wealth using the asset which sits strongest on our balance sheet. In order to do so, you perhaps should reinvest, but do not reinvest unless you know what your opportunity cost is and what your annual return on your investment is. And then be able to calculate how your reinvestment is going to yield you the results you need. Now, look, that may sound complicated. And maybe you're not a dentist listening to me. You're like, Justin, I don't know how to do that. Hey, look, reach out. We have a group of business advisors. We have a group of certified financial planners that we can do this at the back of a napkin. We have been trained on this. We have lived it. I personally have gone through this multiple times. We know how to drive value in a business. It's not easy. It is not easy. Most things that are worth doing never are, right? But we can help you. If you're not thinking along these lines as a business owner and looking at your business as a stock and how is my stock returning to me, then friends, let's talk. Reach out to my team. I realize this is complicated. I do. Trying to explain a growth rate formula through a microphone whenever I can just simply write it down on a napkin. Yeah, that's tough. I challenge you to go take a look at the blog that accompanies this podcast. And then if you need help, let us help you. Life is hard. It is. It's frustrating sometimes. It is. Trust me. You know that. But man, we are so blessed. It is so good. Let's continue to make our lives at least financially simple. Hey, y'all make it a great one.